What's up, everybody? I got a question for you. When do you think the last line of succession of the ancient rulers of Rome finally died out? While you think about that, let me give a few shout outs to my sponsors, Half Acre and Co. Thank you very much. That was too generous. And a very nice surprise. Mark Bain, thank you. Will Cronin, my most consistent contributor. Thank you, bro. Lori McKinley, who looks suspiciously like Chris Cornell. Stephen Spicker, and the law offices of Ryan, you know who you are. It feels a bit prestigious to have an attorney and his girlfriend really like my take on history. And I know there's a lot of smart people that watch my channel, because this is all true. I might get some things wrong, but I'm not making any of it up. So, what do you guys think? When was the last of the ancient Roman rulers? 400 AD, the sack of Rome? Or how about 1453 and the fall of Constantinople? Or how about World War One? Anybody put their money on Dub 1? Nah, that couldn't be right. So I want to recap a little bit out of the last video about the Black or Venetian nobility. And these are the predator dynasties from the 14th to 18th century centered out of Venice. If you look this up, they've changed it and it'll tell you that this has to do with melatonin. And no, this was people whose hearts were black. I had a comment about the double-headed eagle, and yes, it is used as an Orthodox Christian symbol in places, but it's also used by the Habsburg family, so that's where it gets the bad rap. More on them later. I also covered how you have the ancient Phoenicians, who were highly skilled shipbuilders and sailors, up till 600 BC. They disappeared. Then around the 1300s, you have the Venetian Navy that are masters of the Mediterranean. Then you also have Gemesto Platon in the 1300s once again, and he just happens to found the Platonic Academy about the ancient Plato from 300 BC. Platon and his academy were financed by Cosimo de' Medici, founder of the International Medici banking dynasty, which made them the de facto rulers of Florence. They also controlled the Church of Rome, and they financed education and arts throughout the Renaissance, the rebirth. While the Roman Empire has a lot of tangible evidence of its existence, our whole idea of it comes from these de' Medici financed education systems, just like the J.D. Rock institutions today. Only they were the keepers of knowledge after the 1300s catastrophes. See my videos on that, but no matter how you cut it, about 2/3 of Europe was gone. This was a time that if you didn't like what you were being taught, you could take it up with the Inquisition. The Medicis not only controlled the church, but they also controlled academia and secular thought. So this is who had control of literal printing presses after 2/3 of the population was gone in the most preeminent city in the world, Florence. Medici was the real-life godfather, and he allied with the Venetian nobility who controlled all of the trade routes of the Mediterranean. If you're thinking that the 1300s was supposed to be somehow primitive because of Vikings on History Channel or YouTubers that don't know history, this is how they were living in the 1300s. The upper crust has lived in extreme luxury for thousands of years, with sophisticated international trade routes owned by wealthy businessmen and ran by people that could afford a navy. And I would say that the world was on the verge of the Industrial Revolution when the 1300 shift happened, because they say right at that time, windmills started popping up, cannons were in use, people started using water-powered sawmills. This just happens to be in the Venetian Republic. And all of these technological developments just pop up out of nowhere after 800 years of no technological development. Anyway, I think we've pretty well established post-reset 1300s, Northern Italy had a lock on religion, education, and international trade. So they literally wrote the books on what happened before all that. I've never tried to put all this in a linear sequence, so I'll do the best I can. But official history says that Constantine moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople in 300 AD. So then you had the Eastern and Western Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire fell around 500 AD, while the Eastern Empire was just getting its start and ruled over that area for 1,000 years, 1,100 years. Show me any other empire that's lasted anywhere near that long. First off, nobody ever called themselves Byzantinians. This was coined in the 1500s by Hieronymus Wolff. You'll hear scholars today say some information is Byzantine, which means we don't have any information on it. It's all shrouded in secrecy, or overly complex and convoluted. And I've told you guys many times, the truth is usually simple. Here, this pretty much sums up the Byzantine Empire. Inauguration of Constantinople, 330 AD. Sack of Constantinople 900 years later in 1204, and then reconquest in 1261, then finally fell in 1453. Man, a lot can happen in 900 years, but it didn't seem to here. Let's look at some of their world-famous architecture, which is stylistically and structurally indistinguishable from late Roman architecture, just like this old basilica. In the Western Empire, you see this form evolve into the Gothic cathedrals, but you don't see any of this in the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine. Their famous buildings, Hagia Irene, built in 377 AD. Basilica of St. Apollonius, 504 AD. The Emperor's Palace, built 330 and was evidently taken out during the sack of 1453. And then these are listed as Byzantine, even though this is in Italy, 526 AD. San Vitale, 547. The city walls in the 5th century. And then sometime around the 14th century, they built the Church of Holy Apostles in a completely different style. After that, it was all mosques because it came under Muslim rule. There's a serious lack of anything going on in the preceding 1,000 years or so. Even their most famous building, the Hagia Sophia, was built under Justinian in 530 AD. Name Sophia tells me that it was built by Gnostics and then turned into a church. I'll get into that at a later date. I kind of doubt any of you are enjoying this as much as Ruckus sitting next to me. But if you are, give me a like and make sure you're subscribed. Ruckus working hard for the likes. So that's a little odd. They didn't build anything in the Eastern Empire for 1,000 years. Now let's look at the Western. In Rome, they built a Pantheon with the world's largest dome in 120 AD. Then after the Dark Ages in the 1300s, they decided to build the Santa Maria del Fiore with a 5-meter wider span. And evidently, when they started building it, they didn't know how they were going to put a dome on top of it because it sat without one for 80 years. As a builder myself, I guarantee you, nobody on this scale starts a project they don't know how to finish. In the book, A Guide to the Phantom Dark Ages, they note the conspicuous absence of architecture from 600 to 900. I personally think there was about 800 years added, not 1,000, but that's just me. Let's look at some other strange happenings between Eastern and Western empires. In 500 AD, in the Eastern Empire, you had Justinian's plague, which wiped out about 2/3 or 200 million of the ancients. 800 years later, in the 1300s, the Western Empire saw the Black D and lost 200 million medievalists. Strangely enough, you don't hear anything about the 500s incident in the Western Empire and very little about the 1300s in the Eastern Empire. But I'm sure you guys can see why I've asked for a long time if these could have been the same event. It just so happens that at the time both of these events happened, nomadic tribes of the East were expanding into Westerners' territory. Okay, so both these events have that in common. Now, they blame everything on the plagues, but during Justinian's, the Byzantine Empire suffered many natural disasters. This disrupted agriculture and trade. There was a series of seismic events, a large one in 557, and a couple months later, the sickness broke out. Starting in April, the capital was struck with continuous metaseismic action for 6 months, a non-stop quake for 6 months. Then October and December saw even worse ones. So Eastern Empire quakes and plague hit roughly the same time, 500 AD. Terrestrial commotions commenced in Europe in 1348. On the island of Cyprus, the sickness had already broke out when a quake shook the foundations of the island and was accompanied by a hurricane. The sea overflowed, ships were dashed to pieces on the rocks, and this fertile and blooming island was converted into a desert. So they're saying that this was a lush green island 700 years ago. and a tsunami turned it into the desert island it is today. Then an unexampled quake shook Greece and all of northern Italy. All of these cities suffered considerably. Whole villages were swallowed up. Castles, houses, and churches were overthrown. In Corinthia, 30 villages, together with all the churches, were demolished. And when it was all said and done, they said that mountains had been moved from their positions. In thousands of places, chasms were formed. And they attribute this noxious vapor to everybody getting sick. If you want to see what that looks like, this was Turkey last year. It ripped this olive grove in half. It was reported that a fiery meteor, which descended on the earth far in the east, had destroyed everything within a circumference of more than 100 leagues, that's 300 miles, infecting the air far and wide. So this is still the 1300s, and what the people of Europe said they heard happened over in the east. Now let's jump back 800 years and look at what they said happened in the east. Romanos Melados wrote a poem about these events, and the artwork all throughout the cathedrals of San Vitale and Ravenna that I showed you earlier record this in their artwork. You've got all these fiery clouds in the sky, and the angels above are even painted like a streaking meteor up above. You know, you can see everything was good before down below. Here you've got it raining down fire all over the mountain, and the ground is all broken and split apart. Melados writes, "One blow after another, like a massive lightning streaked cloud, fire billowed into the entire sky, consuming everything, crashing, creating panic. He shakes the earth, he makes the ground gnash. We wailed during the period of quakes. The flames did not yield to fierce headwinds. Flames eager to engulf the whole city were fed by roof timbers and whipped into a firestorm by ferocious winds. The raindrops in the clouds never fell to earth. Dust cloud dimmed the sun for 18 months in some places, and so it caused famine. It disrupted entire weather patterns, and still some researchers say that this must have been caused by volcanic eruption, even though we've got written records that it was coming from the sky. They literally say that they watched this thing come in for 2 months. Other researchers with a clue say that, yeah, it was a cometary fragment that exploded in the upper atmosphere, but it sounds like some of it actually hit the earth. But that could never happen, so don't be silly. But now I'm sure you can see how I can speculate whether or not these were the same event or not. All the same things happen. They just say it happened in the east in 500 AD and in the west in 1300s. This was a comment I got after the last video where I didn't go into this much detail, but I went into pretty good detail about how the timeline was changed, how it was changed, what was changed. I even showed the book on the curse of Canaan and how it tracks this lineage all the way back to Noah's Ark. But I guess one of these days I should realize that I've been programmed to believe this timeline. I mean, crap, I was literally pointing out who wrote the book on that timeline. I guess there's just no winning with some people. But to wrap all this up nice and neat, well, how were they able to pull that off? Well, Constantinople fell to the Muslims in the 1400s. After that, the Muslim Ottomans controlled all of the lands that used to be the Eastern Roman Empire. So who's to say the Byzantines didn't control that area for 1,000 years? Who's to say that they did, though? From the 1400s on, the Venetians and the growth of the Holy Roman Empire controlled all of the West and most of the Mediterranean, while the Ottomans controlled the East and therefore all of the trade with India and China, all the Far East countries. To answer my question from the beginning, when was the last of the Roman rulers? It really doesn't matter which way you look at it. It was World War I. The so-called Byzantines called themselves Romans and considered themselves Romans. So when the Ottomans took control of Constantinople, it was the capital of the Roman Empire. They had moved it from Rome to Constantinople. So the Ottomans considered themselves to be carrying on the legacy of the ancient Roman emperors. Meanwhile, in the West, Maximilian of the House of Habsburg decided to crown himself the first Holy Roman Emperor. This is after an alleged 800 years of Visigoth and Ostrogoth rule in this area. But they also considered themselves to be carrying on the ancient legacy of Roman emperors. So it doesn't matter if you consider the Ottomans as the legit lineage, well, their empire fell in Dub 1. If you consider the Holy Roman Empire as the rightful heirs, they ended with the exile of Charles I in Dub 1. But the real truth of the matter is Rome never fell. And there's been wealthy aristocratic families for thousands of years with just unbelievable wealth. I mean, I'm sure these guys in their private art collections have stuff dating back to the ancient Sumerians and the pharaohs. This is a map of the last days of the Ottoman Empire, and the West is still trying to gain control of this region. Egypt and Saudi Arabia are our allies, therefore, the West controls the Suez Canal and international shipping. But let's see, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Turkey. Who were the 8 countries after the New York planes incident that we were supposed to go into? Yeah, it's easier just to say the Ottoman Empire. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Like and subscribe. Static out.